Divorce lawyers. What is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb way a spouse has tried to screw the other? Had a client whose wife wanted him out of the house, told him not to leave, just move to a different bedroom for the time being, because once he was out of the chances of him ever getting back in were slim. He texted his wife and told her he was staying in the house. She called back and left a VM that she wanted him out, and if he wasn't out soon, she would start taking out her unhappiness on the children and would remind the children that mommy was being mean to them because daddy wouldn't leave. Yikes. 101 on how to lose custody. Story 2. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house, documenting dozens of items glued to various things, but for days she was discovering random things and she would call to amend or update her report. My good oven mitts were glued to the wall, or he glued the effing sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that one was diabolical. Story 3. This one hits pretty close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would be the lawyer for both of them as a mediator. So the assets were being divided. My dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, the cars, half his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony, to the tune of like $2,500 a month for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70%-ish of his paycheck. Turns out that my mom and the family friend actually conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that's what a divorce settlement looks like, and she was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. Dad just didn't know how these things work, so after some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. Mom still to this day can't understand why we don't talk to her that much. Story 4. How about a wholesome, insane one? I am not a lawyer, but this was told to me by my mom still regarding the divorce she got from my dad. They couldn't settle on an alimony amount. Mom and her lawyer came in with a number. Dad countered with a number. They couldn't agree because my dad thought my mom should get twice the amount in alimony she was asking for, and my mom didn't want my dad to give her that much money per month. It took months for them to settle on a figure that appeased both of them. Even then, my mom puts aside the extra above what she wanted in case my dad ever has a financial emergency, and my dad puts aside the extra she didn't want in case my mom ever has a financial emergency. The funny thing is, they don't know the other is putting the money aside for the other. My mom told me about her emergency stash, and my dad told my brother about his emergency stash, so bro and I discussed it while talking about what nut jobs our parents are. Story 5. Worked at an airport. A big burly guy brings an ugly dog in a crate to the counter. He is clearly misty-eyed. Turns out his wife got the dog in the divorce and he has to send it to her, and she told him as soon as she gets it, she is putting it down. He asks if he can have some time with the dog before the flight, so they go out in the grass and they both roll around in the grass. The dog's tail just wagging away, not knowing anything about his future. The guy puts him back in the crate, drops him off at the counter, says thanks, and then just walked out, head down, and just looking crushed. That was 30 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Story 6. I represented a guy who was in his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which is why he fell for her, but it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story short about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and she was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow, the second wife found out about this and tried to use a cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had ended his first wife by giving her cancer, and that he was doing the same thing to his quote-unquote fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so in a highly irregular move. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the judge, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. I wish I had an artist rendering of the scene capturing the second wife's crazy eyes, her attorney's look of shame and embarrassment, and the judge's look of confusion, and my look of awe-inspired disgust. Story 7. My friend was going through divorce from insane husband. He had been texting her pics of the gun he bought and threatening her. Police were called, nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at this point. She allowed him to go get his stuff from the house. She was scared to go back to the house alone. I went with her. The first red flag was he had changed the locks, so we waited for the locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. Well, when the door opened, we noticed all the furniture was gone. So we carefully went upstairs in search of her cats. The entire second floor was empty, no cats, no furniture, even her clothes were gone. Coming to find out, he hired a moving company to pack and take everything, even the food in the fridge. Finally found the cats. He had taken them to another vet in town and put them up for boarding under his sister's name, thinking she would not be able to find them. He was finally forced to disclose what happened to her possessions. He had them taken to a storage unit far away from the home. Story 8. Not my divorce, but my divorce lawyer told me about a case she was involved in where both clients were so petty that they all had to meet to argue over literally every single scrap of, well, everything. The final object that neither would settle on was a ceramic rabbit statue, a really generic one from Home Depot or whatever. Zero sentimental value, but since it was the final item, neither side wanted to lose the last thing, and they dragged it out over 3 separate meetings for this one thing. I don't remember who ended up getting it, but once they settled it and signed everything, the winning party stuck it on their lawyers' desks as a gift and walked out. Story 9. I was an assistant for a family law practice, not a lawyer, so it was already a disaster of a divorce because the ex-husband was a difficult person. But it got so much worse when the wife started dating someone new with a severe cat allergy like a year after they split up. Her psycho ex bought a cat on his time with the kids, except he's not allowed pets at his apartment. He sends the kids back to their mom's house with the cat and all its stuff. Mom is angry because she didn't want a cat at all, plus her boyfriend is crazy allergic. She calls us asking what to do because her kids are bawling, saying that she can't get rid of their new, quote, sibling, and she has a cat in the garage. Ex told kids, if mommy loves you, she'll let you keep the cat since daddy is not allowed cats at his house. Story 11. I worked at a computer repair store as a sales technician. I had a guy come in with a desktop that he wanted Windows reinstalled. I asked him if he wanted me to back up all of his data first, and he told me that he had everything he wanted and just do the wipe. I put it in the queue and he paid and left. I started it about an hour later since an XP install was only about 45 minutes off the network. I didn't bother doing anything else except deleting the original partition and making a new one and installing Windows. About an hour after that, his wife came running in asking if we had a computer with Smith as a last name. I told her I did, and she showed me her ID and said that her husband brought it in to try and destroy all proof of him cheating and stealing money from their business. When she asked if I had wiped everything yet, I told her I just did a Windows install and didn't actually really wipe anything. I called her husband and told him the situation. I told him his wife was here to get the computer. He asked me if I reinstalled Windows like we spoke about, and I told him I had. He told me, I don't give a crap, give her the computer. There isn't anything left on it anyway. I said, all right, and hung up. I told her that he said I could give it to her and then explain to her how reinstalling Windows doesn't magically delete everything, and explain to her how I could recover all of her files in a couple of hours. I ended up staying late that night and she bought me pizza and Mountain Dew. I ended up recovering every file he tried to have me destroy and made multiple copies for her. She ended up calling him from the store and reading some of the messages he had tried to delete from his emails. I was worried that he might try to come back in and confront me, but nothing else ever came of it. Story 11. Not my case, but during my first year of law school, lawyers from different practices came to give us a peek behind the curtain of different areas. The divorce lawyer told the story of a rather well-to-do couple that spent months and months and many tens of thousands of dollars fighting over absolutely everything, all the way down to a single ceramic ashtray. He couldn't remember the significance, but somehow he had come through the husband's family. Even after everything else had been decided, they spent many more months and nearly $100,000 fighting over just this ashtray. Then after a court hearing, the wife finally won the ashtray. She promptly strode out to the white courthouse steps and smashed the ceramic ashtray. Left the pieces all over for the husband to see on his way out. Decided that day that I would not be a divorce lawyer. Story 12. Have a friend who went through a nasty divorce and his ex was vengeful as heck despite him having done nothing, quote, wrong like cheating or lying, etc. Basically, he got laid off from a good job and the loss of status embarrassed her, especially as he took to being a stay-at-home dad and their kids adored him. Never mind, she had an MBA and a 6-figure job herself. She would buy expensive stuff on credit cards to show high expenses, then return it for cash or store credit so that the refund didn't go back on the card so that she could try to get more support. To just get a job, he took one at Home Depot. He had been an engineer at a tech company. Later on, he landed an IT consulting position that was part-time but paid about what he made at Home Depot working full-time. She petitioned the courts to try and force him to have a full-time job, basically wanting to force him to spend 30 more hours to earn the same. Part of his custody granted him dinner one night a week with the kids, i.e. 5 to 7 p.m. He asked for it to be school pickup to 7 p.m. instead, and she refused that even though the 3 to 5 they were at home with a nanny who had to be paid for that time while mom was at work. Story 13. Husband and wife divorce after husband finds out wife is texting other guys. He goes into a deep depression. They didn't have much, lots of debt, and 2 dogs. One was about a dog he had since before the marriage. He got her. The other dog was only about 3 years old and was bought to keep the older 7-year-old dog company while they worked. Wife demanded that since he got his dog that she got the other. He is depressed and just wants to move on, so he agrees. She gets the dog and has it put down the next day. She didn't want the dog, she just wanted to hurt him. Story 14. Not a lawyer, just grew up with a difficult family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind with this divorce, let me tell you. So my parents had been separated but living in the same house for a while, and it was around the time of year the family would normally go for a camping trip. Canada Day, I believe. She convinced my dad that we would break the trip up and he would get a week, then when he returned, she would get a week with us, the 3 kids. Secretly, during my dad's week, she got her friends to help clear the entire house out, and I literally mean clear it out. There was nothing left, not a single clothes hanger, no couches, TVs, quite literally nothing. She chose this vacation setup really well too. Camping meant we didn't need money or have access to self-service, which she took advantage of as well and emptied the bank accounts and hid all the money away. She didn't stop there though. She also maxed out lines of credit and all credit cards. Normally this would take a while, but she was smart as heck in this approach. Earlier, when planning this divorce, she had convinced my dad to quit his job, quite high paying, I should add, to start a company. This company was still new and needed a ton of expenses paid, so the banks didn't think twice about this ridiculous amount of money being transferred, as it wasn't out of the norm anyways from their new setup with the company. Then, when it came time for my dad's trip to end, she told him he needed to call her when he got back in cell range. Upon calling, she told him that she was on the way out in the same direction anyway, so we could just meet halfway to spare us kids a bit of driving time on our way to the next trip, which was odd considering after a week of camping, we all wanted to shower and clean up, but she was very adamant. We met up and swapped vehicles, and my dad was on the way home alone while we were off to hide away at a location different than where she had told my dad. When he got home, he thought we had been robbed. It didn't sink in. He called the cops and started phoning family because of how empty the house was. He broke down and didn't know what to do. That's when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she left him and took everything. She hid us and I believe tried to steal us, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually, it somewhat caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked at what she did. She even went as far as trying to convince us kids that my dad was cruel and had us interrogated by a cop wanting us to lie about him. The whole situation was crazy. She ended up blowing all the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends, and when the judge ordered her to pay it back, she fled the country. Now she lives in Australia and doesn't have to pay anything. Story 15. I didn't practice divorce law, but I did an internship with a family law judge in law school that involved me sitting in on a lot of stuff. One divorced couple came in because the ex-husband wanted to lower his spousal support payments due to his lowered income, great financial responsibilities, and the fact that his ex-wife was declining to seek paid employment, all of which sounds reasonable on the face. It turned out that while his income had been lowered due to cuts, his new wife, who technically worked as his assistant, and had done so prior to the divorce, was now making quadruple her salary, more than he ever had. He claimed that his ex-wife had unpaid renters living with her and could have money to survive if she charged them rent. It turned out they were the couple's shared 18-year-old twins who were living at home just having graduated high school and were going to keep living at home while starting college in the fall. It also later turned out that he allowed his stepdaughter and her 2 children to live with him and his wife rent-free and paid for her college. His ex-wife produced evidence that he told his own kids to figure out paying for college themselves. He claimed that his ex-wife worked as a nanny for free by choice and should be getting paid for work elsewhere. The kids she watched for free were their 3 joint grandchildren from their eldest child, 2 of which were severely disabled. He claimed that when he married his new wife, he gained over 15 new dependents, which was technically true, but those dependents were all in Mexico and included his new wife's grown siblings and their families, none of whom he had ever met. This dude was shocked when spousal support wasn't decreased. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but my partner has a mate who was going through a messy divorce. He registered as a gambling addict and went to some gambling anonymous or whatever it's called and proceeded to go to the casino every day, taking wads of cash with him, pretending to gamble it all away while he was secretly squirreling it all away. That way, when it came to the divorce and he was questioned where all his money went, he could prove that he lost it all through his gambling addiction and never had to pay her a penny. Story 17. Personal experience unbeknownst to me, and my ex was having an affair. I worked a lot of hours so I didn't pick up on it. We had always dreamed of buying a house on the huge local lake to retire in. We literally started shopping for houses and even toured a dozen or so. We found 2 well within our budget, but would need to sell our house first. My wife convinced me to take out a couple of loans in my name and get a couple of credit cards, again, in my name. Most of the bills were in hers and the mortgage was in hers, so I did. I spent about $25,000 in credit card and loans to fully update our house and get it ready for market. As soon as the work was done, she told me she was leaving me and wanted to sell the house. Story 18. I read about a case where the wife was trying to take half of a guy's business and millions in personal assets, only to find out that the business had been moved into his son's name years earlier, and the guy donated all their savings, millions of dollars, to a children's hospital in his soon-to-be ex-wife's name, so she couldn't get the money. The judge said that what he did was technically legal since it was community property and no freeze had been placed on it yet, but was morally unconscionable. The lawyer said in his entire life, he never saw a bigger smile on a man's face. He just kept saying, "I just wanted to help the children," and smiling. Story 19. Wow, today's my day. Another, where to start? The person who, quote, hid $250,000 from a business sale so it wouldn't be included in the equalization payment while providing frank disclosure on the actual sale number. The person who made a fake street worker ad for their ex as proof that they were not a good parent without considering that I would want to know why they browsed street worker ads during their parenting time. The ones who spent thousands of dollars working out the appropriate access, custody, and support terms for their dog? Hard to say. Unreasonable people keep my lights on. To add the one that bothered me the most, it wasn't my file, but I was in court that day for another matter. A local police officer had a family law conference. Coincidentally, a bunch of officers from his force and neighboring forces decided to attend family court that day and stand in the hall outside the one family law courtroom. A dozen officers in full uniform there to provide, quote, support to their brother, I guess. His ex had to walk through a gauntlet of uniformed officers to get to court. Now, this one really bothered me and still does. If I had been her lawyer, I would have raised a fuss for trying to intimidate my client and potentially trying to intimidate me. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 20. I'm not a lawyer, but work in the court system. One case that came in was a couple divorcing on mutual terms. The husband had one child with her and the wife had a child from a previous marriage. He agreed to pay child support for both children. I guess he really cared about this other child enough to support her even though it isn't his obligation. The judge signs the order, they go to set up the child support account and it gets kicked back saying you can't have 2 accounts for one child. Turns out she's been collecting child support from the biological father the entire time and never told him. She basically tried to milk 2 fathers for one child and the other attorney knew about it. Story 21. I just saw this on a YouTube video. The husband gave the wife everything material, house, cars, etc. in the divorce, except his Magic the Gathering collection. When he went to collect it, he found his wife had broken the seal on his MTG Alpha starter deck. This was worth about $20K USD at the time, and currently for sale on various sites for around $50K. For context, as soon as you break the seal, the deck becomes worthless, and unless you get some of the insanely priced cards like Black Lotus, you will lose a significant amount of money. So she literally got all the assets they accrued over the marriage and ended the only thing of value this guy got out of total spite. Story 22. A friend's ex-wife and he settled a divorce with her getting the house, a hefty chunk of retirement, all the gifted jewelry, and his Harley she had gifted him for his birthday. A few weeks later, a, quote, robbery occurred, and the only thing that was stolen was the jewelry that he had gifted her, which was intended for their daughter. She tried to file an insurance claim on the jewelry, forgot to get appraisals and add as writer, so the max insurance paid was $1,500 for over $20,000 of jewelry. Suspicion is she staged it, but is now stuck with stolen jewelry, and she can't legally sell, nor wear, nor give to the daughter without tipping the dad off to the scam. Story 23. Not my story, but one I read here a couple of years ago. I really hope I don't butcher it as it's been a while, but here it goes. There was a super wealthy guy that was a top exec at a Fortune 500 company who was getting a divorce and it was rather nasty. This guy was pretty much set for life. He had a bunch of stock, houses, and assets in so many places. The ex-wife wanted everything she could possibly get. The husband came up with an idea that if she let him keep everything, he would give her half of his paycheck for the rest of his life. She quickly agreed because his checks were huge, and this also included any bonuses, which were in the millions. As soon as the paperwork was finalized, he quit his job and started to work part-time at a sporting goods store. I can't remember which one. The story was told by another employee there, not the actual guy that got divorced. Anyway, he still had all of his assets, so he would drive to work in a super expensive car, and one day the employee asked how he could possibly afford that car. The guy said he was set for life and didn't even need to work at all, but every Friday when he got his paycheck, it made everything so worth it, knowing his ex-wife would only be getting about $150 per check. Story 24. Not a lawyer, my dad went through some financial troubles. One day, he decided he could have more money if he chose not to pay mortgages, property taxes, car notes, etc. Eventually, he was arrested for tax evasion and my mom found out and immediately filed for divorce. My mom was a shopaholic and took no for an answer about as well as a toddler being told they can't have ice cream. She insisted my dad didn't make enough money and kept maxing out her Amex weekly, thus my dad's solution. During the divorce, she said she wanted the nice cars. Great, take them. Then she told my dad she wanted the house. My dad begged and pleaded with her not to take the house. Point blank told her that the house was days away from being foreclosed on. He told her that she couldn't afford to take that hit on her credit, but she really wanted to stick it to him, so she thought he was bluffing. After a week of mediation, he finally gave in and said, "Fine, take the house." The house and the mortgage were transferred into her name, and the house was foreclosed on and a lien was placed on the house. Through some shady deal, she short-sold the house without informing the new owner of the lien, failed to claim it on her taxes, and spent the money. When the new owner finds out, she's screwed, not to mention if the IRS ever comes to collect capital gains, all because she wanted to screw over my dad. Story 25. He owed her $500 as part of the settlement. He brought 2 buckets of unsorted coins, mostly pennies, to our office. She took the light bulbs out of every fixture when she moved out, then refused to give him right of first refusal if she wanted to get rid of their dog. She spent a year and a half systematically destroying their business and then expected him to pay her hundreds of thousands of dollars for her share of the now worthless business. Story 26. Child of traumatic divorce here. There's so many, and I mean so many things I could post on this thread about how terrible my parents were to each other, but this takes the cake. My parents were separated in the process of divorcing and had split custody between my brother and I. We were 5 and 7 at the time. My dad didn't have his own place yet, so when it was his turn to be with us, he came back to our house, the one he purchased, mind you, and my mom was supposed to leave. One weekend, they were arguing over something, and it got so bad that my mom wouldn't leave and told my dad she would call the police, something she apparently did a lot to get her way, which after growing up with her, I can attest she did this a lot unnecessarily to control us. So she left, called the police, and told them my father was dangerous and had a gun. My dad was in the army, and we had plenty of guns, locked in a safe, of course. And of course, the police were just doing their job and took my mom at face value. It went so fast from my brother and I watching TV with my dad to the police knocking at our door, my dad opening the door and getting pepper sprayed without the cops saying anything, and then my dad locked the door and the cops couldn't bust it down, so they came around back and broke our sliding glass door in so they could arrest my dad in our front yard with all of our neighbors watching. I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but it was traumatizing for sure. Then my mom tried to get full custody of us in their actual divorce, and thank goodness the judge ruled for split custody. My whole childhood was difficult, honestly, because all they did was explain very deep and emotionally complex situations to very young children who just wanted their parents to love each other. But yeah, I've never quite forgiven my mom for that one. Story 27. Doubt this will be seen, but a family friend was the lawyer on a pretty cut and dry divorce case. He was representing the husband, and he felt pretty bad for him. No bad history between the two, but even standard cases can get messy. Apparently, his wife was being seriously sharky and trying to take basically everything. The guy was at wit's end. Our family friend was driving behind him on the way to court when he crashed his truck into an SUV. Didn't seem too bad, flipped the SUV on its side, but he was already in it helping the other driver out. It was right in front of the courthouse, so no big deal, lots of cops around to help. Then our family friend realized something concerning. The SUV looked a lot like the guy's wife's SUV. Before he could say anything, he saw the cops suddenly swarm the guy and pin him to the ground. While everyone watched on thinking this guy was helping, he actually was his wife. She unfortunately didn't survive. Pretty sure that was the last divorce case our family friend took. Story 28. Not a lawyer, but my parents had a bad divorce. Dad cheated. Mom had a bad substance habit. Parents had a meeting with the judge to set up custody. It was supposed to be around noonish, but my dad's lawyer got the meeting moved to the morning on the day of. No one told my mom, so dad shows up. Mom didn't, which meant my dad got his way. 100% custody of my sister and I, plus got to decide if we could see our mom or not. And when we did, it was only for an hour. My mom comes to the original meeting just to be turned away. Story 29. Articled at a family law firm, thankfully moved on since. The worst I saw was a decades-long case. The husband had been in a motorcycle accident, suffered brain damage. He has severely limited capacity going forward, got a huge settlement afterwards. The wife spent the next several years stealing the entirety of the guy's money and property variously by forging his signature or putting documents in front of him that he couldn't understand and telling him they were something benign so he'd sign it. She then forged a bunch of letters from a tax authority and convinced him he was about to go to jail, and further convinced him to flee the country. He finally came back several years later to find out everything he owned was in her name, and one of the documents he was told to sign was divorce papers. Dude got left with nothing. I moved on before I found out how the story ended. Story 30. Not a divorce lawyer, but my buddy's wife left him 6 months after the wedding and got engaged to another dude a couple of weeks after leaving. They built a house together, like 3,500 square feet. It was absolutely beautiful. She had a hand in designing it, and they moved in right before the wedding. As the divorce was going through, it was decided she and her new guy would keep the house. We moved his stuff out and threw 2 back-to-back Project X-type parties, didn't clean up anything, and just left the house sitting for like 10 to 15 days until she moved in, middle of the summer, AC off, windows shut. It was bad. There was so much damage. I won't go into details, just use your imagination. It was bad. The ex never officially moved back in because it was so bad. They sold the house a few months later after a lot of repairs. He did have to pay out quite a bit. I know all of the carpets had to be replaced. I knew that after the first party. A lot of drywall, everything needed to be painted because we had one guy in there decorating the walls, ceiling, and floors. The pool was also damaged because he cracked it with a sledgehammer. He says it was worth every penny just for her to lose her dream house. Story 31. Formerly married, divorced for many years now. This is not as evil as some, but sucked nonetheless. My ex-wife had the luxury of staying home while I worked upwards of 80 hours per week. I was okay with this. When we separated and began the divorce process, she not only got our house that I paid for the entire 5 years, the 2 cars and all the furniture and electronics, I basically got my clothes. The judge agreed to all of this because I, quote, had a proven history of working and the ability to make money, whereas she did not, so she required these items. Crappy enough, but wait, there's more. She obviously lost the house quickly and moved in with her wealthy parents. The best part is she literally gathered up her receipts for getting her hair and nails done, her tanning receipts, restaurant receipts, you name it, for all the stuff I paid for. The judge granted her an exorbitant amount of alimony for the next couple of years to, quote, continue her expected quality of life. I had to sleep on friends' couches and in cars for many months to recover from losing everything while still trying to work and pay bills. We divorced in 2007, by the way. And to this day, my ex-wife is 40 years old, as huge as a house. She was a model type when we met in 2000, and still to this day has never had a job or another long-term relationship. Oh, and her parents I told you about, the ones she still lives with in a 5-bedroom home on the New Jersey shore, they are a CEO for a casino and the vice president of a well-known bank. So yeah, forget her and her pleasant work-free life in a millionaire home and her Mercedes-Benz she didn't work a day in her adult life for. Story 32. Saw my friend get arrested and brought to jail. He'd married someone 20 years his junior, but they were splitting up after about 2 years of marriage. He had just gotten his own apartment at that point, and he was in the process of moving out and filing for the divorce. He wasn't quick enough. One day, they get into an argument. He turns his back on her. She pushes him from behind. He falls to the ground. He hits her leg, bruising her, and she tells him if he doesn't give her X amount of money, she's calling the police and saying that he choked her and punched her in the face. He refused. She called the cops and made her fake report. His lawyer advised him to plea out. He said he wasn't sympathetic enough. He's an older guy, has some type of Asperger's, and is very stoic. He still has PTSD from the event. It's going on about 20 years now. He had never been arrested before. This doesn't really fit the mold of what you're asking for. It's not particularly insane or creative, but it is evil, what she did to him. It says something about how much destruction a simple push and a lie can cause. Story 33. My sister and her ex-husband had agreed in arbitration that he would keep the house and car. and that she would keep the furniture and electronics. My dad and I rented a U-Haul to help her go get her stuff. We figured the amount of stuff she would get would be enough to get about $10,000–$15,000 off Craigslist. We arrived at the house to find only an IKEA futon, a smaller TV than they had, an old iMac, and all the outdoor furniture destroyed. We were so devastated for her. She decided she wanted to close that venomous chapter of her life, so she just took her losses rather than fight for stupid possessions. Happy ending, she finished optometry school and became an optometrist, found a great husband, and is raising 2 awesome kids. Story 34. Not an attorney. I heard this one from a friend of mine. He was put in the middle of his parents' divorce. His mom is a teacher in Ontario, Canada, and she gets paid very well, about $120,000 per year. His dad is just a general laborer and made about $55,000 per year. When they got divorced, he gave her the house free and clear with the understanding that when she retires, he will get 55% of her pension to offset his interest in the house. She agrees, of course, she has to retire for him to get his money. Fast forward a few years and his mom retires but never tells his dad. The son finds out and told his mom, "Hey, you're retired, you have to start giving dad his money." She tells the son, "Don't tell your dad, please." Fast forward a few more years, he finds out his dad is in financial difficulty because of the downturn in the economy. He indirectly tells his dad that his mom has been retired for a few years now. So he contacts his attorney. Now she's screwed. She made the family angry divorce court because she agreed to this and is now trying to screw him over. In the end, he gets 65% of her pension for the rest of their lives, and she has to pay him all the money that she owes him. Story 35. I was a family law paralegal, but my worst was my own divorce, actually. My ex came out as gay and decided he wanted to be a costume designer. Okay, well, bad for me, but more power to him. He decided the historical collection of paper dolls my grandma had left me should go to him because he wanted them as models for his costume designs. My lawyer had to claim them, the shoebox of paper dolls, as non-marital property due to being an inheritance. His lawyer made some sort of legal claim about how they were commingled and thus marital property because I'd put other stuff in the box that I had bought during the marriage, such as a coloring book. So, in an otherwise uncontested divorce, there's a giant paragraph in the decree awarding me my non-marital inherited box of paper dolls. Story 36. I had a friend get screwed over, not a lawyer, but here goes. She's probably the highest functioning, unmedicated, paranoid schizophrenic I've ever known. He married her well after her condition was obvious, their 20s. She was earning 6 figures working in finance. She's really smart. Anyway, had 3 kids. 20-some years of marriage later, the kids start mimicking the mom. The voices are telling me the eldest daughter, 15 at the time, and mom don't get along. The mom thinks the daughter has been replaced with the girl. That's how she starts referring to her daughter, thinking her daughter has been replaced with a quote-unquote twin. The daughter doesn't want to go to school one day, preferring to stay at home on the computer. The mom turns off the computer, daughter attacks mother, mom defends herself, CPS gets involved. She paid the mortgage, he got the house, the sports car, full custody. She got the minivan, 0 visitation, lost her job. Granted, she gets to keep her investments and personal savings, which are considerable. She was actually great at her job, but the mental stress of the divorce and missing her kids took its toll. She could retire whenever she likes. They were married like 20 years. Now she works at Walmart doing customer service and basically lives every day in rage and misery, missing her 3 kids. She's still the sweetest woman you'll ever meet. Hearing voices doesn't make one crazy. Yes, she is a bit delusional. She hallucinates. She refuses to accept any mental help and insists most mental illnesses are nonsense. Everyone loves her in the community. The guy remarried to a woman in her 30s. Story 37. I am no longer practicing, but when I was active, I practiced in a small firm. We represented the wife in a divorce against her husband, who is a very prominent businessman. As a show of force by the husband, he purchased the building where our offices are located and proceeded to make small but annoying changes. Parking spaces were moved to the furthest spots. The elevator would randomly be down for maintenance. Our offices were located on the top floor. The cleaning schedule and crews would sporadically change. The firm's lease also happened to end during the divorce representation, and we were given a notice to vacate in the middle of the winter holidays. After our departure, the husband put up signage of his company on the outside of the building where our offices used to be located. Story 38. Obligatory not a divorce lawyer, but when my mother was divorcing her first husband and trying to get custody of their daughters, this was before I was born, she had a scheduled trial, but her husband had a friend fake a phone call to her to tell her that the trial was canceled. So she went to work that day, not able to afford to skip a day. In reality, the trial wasn't canceled. Her husband showed up to court without her, and he won by default. Luckily, she was able to explain to the judge what happened. Unfortunately, another day when she was at work, he picked up their daughters and booked a flight all the way to South Dakota from their home in Arizona. She couldn't afford child support, let alone afford the lawyers to get them back, so she was forced to give them up. Story 39. Worked as a secretary at one point in a family law office. This one is really small, but as a kid from a divorced family, the length people will go to not get screwed over by their spouse, to the point they will actively screw over their kid, really makes me angry. One client spent like a week arguing with his ex over socks for the kid. At one point, the kid was sockless every time they switched to the other parent's house because they were in a stalemate over buying socks and sending them to the other parent's household. How you get to a point where you're paying $300 an hour to argue about buying socks for your kid to wear for an entire week? My heart went out to that kid as I assumed that was the least of their parental worries. Story 40. Had a coworker whose husband, a doctor, threw her out of the house that they shared for more than 30 years. He had a new girlfriend and wanted her to move in. She had no idea he was cheating on her. Since she was working for him, she was left with nothing, no job, no money. He canceled her cards and bank accounts and nowhere to live. In a hurry to work, she only found a minimum wage job and a tiny studio apartment. At that time, she was in her early 60s and not in good health. He dragged that divorce for years, gave money to their spoiled kids, so they took his side. I never understood why someone could be so mean to the woman he once loved, the mother of his children. A woman who worked for him for years, helping him build his practice. The only explanation I can find is his love of money. Finally, a couple of years later, he was accused of misconduct and lost his license. Technically, he retired. His beautiful house has been for sale for months now and is probably going to be demolished for a new development. I have no idea if the girlfriend is still with him, but in a perfect scenario, I hope she left him. As for my coworker, we lost touch after I left the store, but I hope she found happiness. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.